Hi, I'm Rich Simon, and I work on analytics strategy for Axis Group. We provide end-to-end data and analytics solutions so companies and agencies can move ahead in their digital journey. And today I'm lucky enough to moderate a discussion about modern data architecture between two experts in data engineering. Levi Bailey is an AVP of cloud architecture at Humana, where he's helping to transform healthcare by using data interoperability to achieve better outcomes for patients. And Keith Gaputis is my colleague from Axis Group, where he leads up our data engineering team and gets hands-on implementing data platforms and process automation for our clients. So gentlemen, welcome. And let's kick off with our first question. So we hear the term modern data architecture a lot, and it's been used a lot of ways to describe a bundle of technologies, but what does it really mean? And can we just get a quick sense from each of you on what it means to you? Are there principles or successful architecture patterns that teams follow? Levi, let's start with you.
Hey, Rich. Thanks for that introduction. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I think when I think about modern data architecture, it's really about handling various types of data. Traditionally in enterprise, we really focused on our transactional data, the data generated within systems used to run the business. The reality is, in today's ecosystem, it's a requirement and really helps you innovate within your business when you start handling all the various types of data that we now have available to us, such as IoT, click streams, schemaless data, dynamic data. And I think a modern data architecture is about being able to handle those and derive value from them. And that requires us to be able to work with dynamic data in a way that allows the business to basically take advantage of it seamlessly without any interruptions.
That's great. And Keith, what about you? What do you think of when you hear modern data architecture today?
Thanks, Rich. I think to build on what Levi was saying, make the kind of stuff that he was just saying possible, there certainly are some new technical components and new patterns. It's probably a broader ecosystem with more tools, lots of moving parts potentially, but these parts tend to be more specialized to accomplish some of the tasks at hand. There are certain architectural differentiators. Having a composable architecture where you can swap out components, avoiding vendor lock, using something like orchestration software, architectures that are very repeatable, where everything is code and everything's deployed by pipelines, and you can easily promote infrastructure, systems, solutions, jobs, code, everything, even data in some cases. And really systems that are not just observable, but even measurable, emitting telemetry and being able to really monitor the performance of the systems well and to kind of measure how well they're doing and then being able to take action off this. But really, I would say more importantly than both of these things, I would say that modern architectures just work differently. There's new mindsets, new philosophies, principles, things like that, seeking to incorporate the principles of DataOps, approaching your data investments, fundamentally from an agile perspective, end-to-end automation, knowing where your data is, knowing when a data pipeline's broken in real time, viewing your data ecosystem as a place to drive innovation, taking a people-centered approach, focusing on the needs of the use cases, really starting with people rather than tools, bringing in the kind of tools that's needed, but also keeping an eye to the future, making sure that you're not kind of overfitting to a particular use case, because ultimately you don't want to be making new data investments again and sort of redoing this in 2 years.
So that is a great point about investing wisely. Levi, that sounds like a lot of change that we've been talking about for modern data architecture and more than just for technology. So big transformations are really risky business and so many are known to fail. How should leaders decide when to invest? When is the right time to step in?
Yeah, Rich, I really feel like the future is now. I don't think that you can really wait. The point to that is really around just think about the ecosystem around how we interact with our different services today. Everybody has an expectation. We have customer expectations that the people or the organizations that we interact with are going to know us and going to tailor our experiences based upon our point of view. I think that's been predicated on companies like Facebook, Netflix, YouTube, all the standard interactions. And as we see the population continue to change, the younger generations coming up, they've lived with this within their entire lifespan. So now it is just an expectation. So in order to stay relevant, you really have to know your customer. And I don't think you can wait to start making investments within a modern data ecosystem or architecture, because if you don't do that, you will not be able to create that personalized experience. The best example I can probably give of this is the Blockbuster versus Netflix example. Blockbuster owned the movie business, right? I mean, when I was a kid, we used to always go to Blockbuster. You'd rent a video, you'd bring it home. That was your weekend. Netflix, this little startup, comes in and decides that there's a better way for us to experience our media. And it's not just about watching a video, but it's also about recommendations and helping you find the titles and the shows and the things that you want. And Blockbuster didn't change. They just went with their basic business model saying, no, we're too big to fail. Well, because they didn't innovate, where's Blockbuster? They're not here anymore. Now Netflix and Hulu and all these other streaming companies own the industry. So I think you have to really focus on turning all your data into a value stream. You cannot ignore the fact that all that data is really what's going to help your business grow and take the next step in your organizational growth.
That's great. Hey, Keith, do you have anything you want to add to that point?
Yeah, thanks, Rich. I mean, I think to make a transformation like Levi's describing, you do need to make sure that you're taking a targeted approach. There's a potential for a large upfront investment depending on your current maturity. There's also an important cost benefit consideration of, when should you be investing in improving your data systems versus more, making investments in your upfront transactional systems. I think that is an important consideration. And then regardless of kind of what you can take on now, I think you can start with a mindshare investment today. We're all here at a DataOps conference. We're all interested in the topic of DataOps, the tools and approaches in the space. There is a better way to organize resources. There's a better way to kind of work towards getting data-driven outcomes. Everyone already has data. How mature is your current approach? And what can you start learning? What can you start introducing to either begin this journey or to continue it?
That's great. Levi, I'm sure that our viewers are really quite interested in how a company as large and complex as Humana approached a shift to modern data architecture. How'd you get started? And what has the journey been like for Humana?
In my previous response, I talked about how you have to, in order to stay relevant, you have to be willing to take advantage of the data that you have and also continue to expand usage of that data in order to basically grow and stay relevant. We were kind of at that crux, and some of it was predicated on regulatory requirements. We just look at healthcare in our industry. Costs continue to rise. People don't always get better. It's chronic conditions across the board. So we kind of had to focus on, well, how do you solve that problem? How do you address it? So there was actually one study that we did with the University of Pittsburgh that was quite interesting. When we look at the cost of healthcare, they kind of look to see, where is waste in healthcare? Where are we experiencing all this waste? And let's determine if there's some factor that we can address in order to lower those costs. When they did that study, they found almost $1 billion, about 900 and something million dollars of waste in the healthcare system. Of that 900 million, almost a little over a third, was directly related to lack of interoperability. When we talk about interoperability, it's about the sharing of that common data that can kind of help facilitate healthcare for better outcome. So when we think of healthcare in the US, there are really three pillars of healthcare. You have the consumer, obviously, or the patient, you have providers, and you have payers. And the reality is they all kind of intersect at some point. Now, in the past, traditionally, the intersection with the payer was always a financial interaction, meaning what services are you doing and what do I need to then reimburse you for as a provider so that this member or this consumer patient can get their healthcare completed. The reality is that that's not going to necessarily drive better outcomes because it's a service-based model, meaning you do a service, I reimburse you for that service. irregardless of the outcome and whether it's the right service to be performing for the patient. So one of the things that we looked at doing as an organization is really drive to a value-based care model. Value-based care model is around saying, I'm going to basically base reimbursement and allow the provider to have the flexibility to do the right services for better outcomes. And when you do better outcomes, that is a value-based approach that will basically benefit the provider. So when we think about trying to create a value-based model, and we really think about trying to lower overall cost, the only way to do that is to really start integrating and creating an interoperable fabric for the healthcare ecosystem. And so we focused on needing, data democratization and moving siloed data and kind of bringing it out and exposing it via a data fabric. So that's kind of where we started our journey. Now, when we think about the approach we took, one of the foundational pieces was that we really used a platform approach. So going back to some of the points that Keith made a little bit earlier, he talked about the fact that you have to make incremental investments. And I think that's absolutely true. We did not take this and do like a big bang approach and just create all of our data as interoperable. But what we did do is we started with a platform approach that would allow us to grow into and expose more as use cases surfaced that we could take advantage of and put large investments in order to create a certain outcome. So we started by building this platform, and we used a number of different technologies, including things like stream sets, Kafka, MongoDB, all cloud-based technology. Because again, if we're going to be working with these large amounts of data and we're going to try to scale out to basically support the entire healthcare ecosystem, we had to build it in a scalable infrastructure. And that meant really taking advantage of cloud computing. So we've had a lot of successes with it. One of the things we did is we met some of the interoperable standards that now allow members and individuals to control their healthcare data, to really, share their data with third-party applications to where they can create health systems or health management platforms, whatever, the sky's the limit. It really creates a lot of innovation. We also focused on some provider use cases that would directly lower the cost of administrating healthcare, such as pre-approvals and pre-authorizations, as well as sharing some data that we have because we're a very rich center of data. We get claims data, which has EHR and clinical data in it. We also have pharmacy data, which really talks about what are the drugs that this member's been prescribed. Are they taking them? Those types of information we collect. We have that. So now we are exposing that data to where others can use it and really impact the point of care. And so when we thought about this problem, we started with first a platform approach, determine what the principles of our platform was, and then we focused on certain use cases as they presented themselves and began to build out a full interoperable and really focused on data democratization as those use cases surfaced.
So Levi, then how do you know where to focus and how to make sure that you're really getting ROI out of those efforts at Humana?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important thing. And I will say in some ways it can be challenging at times to determine where your ROI is. But going back to staying relevant, one of the key things to me is as we look at experiences that we're creating, we track our customer retention, right? What value are we bringing to our customer? If we're bringing value, we fully believe that the customer will end up staying. So one of the things you can look at is just, are you creating experiences that are driving customer retention? That was one place you can kind of go. The other is basically driving new insights that help you kind of understand how your business is operating and what impacts you're having. So I think the more insights that you're generating can kind of be a pointer towards ROI for different use cases. You really got to start thinking of your data as a value center. You can't look at it as a cost anymore. And I think you can look to lower certain costs, like, we've been able to lower some of the clinical costs for providers and others within the healthcare system by using insights that we're able to generate by sharing and creating this interoperable framework.
So Keith, everyone is about value here. Are there things that you can measure besides ROI from new business cases?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting question. So like everyone here presumably already has one or more data platforms of varying levels of age and maturity. How much is it costing you by not being able to perform the innovation that Levi's talking about? I mean, what's currently not possible? What's too slow? What's too expensive? All that lost innovation is almost an opportunity cost of really not making the investment. But also, one of the most expensive resources that everyone has is the time of their developers, their better engineers and data scientists and things like that. How much of them are spending their time dealing with problems, dealing with scalability issues, just trying to keep things working versus actually building out these new use cases that Levi is discussing? There's certainly things that you can measure. There's a huge amount of things that can be measured. Things like how fast it takes to get new analytics to be able to build and to release it, the actual time to detect problems in your data platform, in your data pipelines, data issues, and to resolve those issues. Those are two really big examples. But really in terms of measurement, I mean, we spend a lot of time bringing in all these business data sources, doing all this sort of like business analytics. There's this whole other layer of analytics, which is like looking at all this data from your data platform that's generating and your kind of agile development efforts and your ticketing systems and all that kind of stuff. And it's almost like meta analytics. So almost like to get to some of these KPIs, like just treating it like an analytics problem, but it's like a whole nother layer of analytics. And you can start measuring some of this stuff now to help create a baseline. And in having this data, having this information is going to help you better determine whether or not you're getting an ROI from the platform investment sort of outside of the use cases.
So then, Levi, DataOps is on the leading edge of the Gartner data management hype cycle, and everybody is talking about it. But how have you found you need to design a DataOps org that really is capable of delivering on its promises? Who are those essential stakeholders, and how do you keep them working together?
It's a really good question. And we're still learning into it. I mean, Humana doesn't have it all solved, I'll tell you that. It's one of those things where you iterate and you learn and you kind of adjust and you find what works well, and then you make more adjustments until you get yourself a process that really works. But I think foundationally, one of the first things you really have to understand to make this work is you have to develop cross-functional teams. There has to be a partnership. And when I talk about cross-functional teams, I'm not talking about IT teams. I'm talking about teams that cross barriers, such as, you need a strong data governance organization. You need someone that's going to control the quality, because if you're sharing data, but it's not of high quality and you don't have metadata around it and all of that lineage and information is missing, it really limits the impact of using that data. You can't depend upon the results that you're getting. So I think you have to have a strong data governance organization. You have to have business engaged. They have to take a role within that capacity as like data stewards, and within IT, you have to have IT custodians. And really all three of those together are playing to enable these dynamic pipelines of data that are resilient and basically have the observability, telemetry. You're lowering impact of data drift, and you're allowing the organization to take advantage of all the rich data that might be locked in silos.
Keith, how can a company increase its odds of success? What makes it so hard to get right? Are there technical approaches or design patterns that are worth investing in now, right at the start?
I think that's a good question. I think one of the mistakes that we see very often is people start building out these new platforms kind of in a new way, and they anticipate a linear view of progress. There is kind of an upfront investment, and you will see use case acceleration, like kind of as you start to get things into production, it'll become easier to be more agile and to sort of take on the next use case. We saw last year during COVID, organizations had more data ops maturity, were able to respond more quickly. I think that there are other aspects, like one of the strategies that works pretty well for us, especially on greenfield projects, is this idea of just getting something working quickly, almost thinking of it as like an end-to-end POC at low fidelity. I mean, it might just be a couple tables, it might just be a couple of fields or something like that, but kind of getting it hooked up, but having, basic versions of CI/CD, having either some automated testing or kind of placeholders in your process for automated testing. You're building out some of the monitoring capabilities that you intend to have in your final product so that you kind of get this POC built. You have a working solution, and then you're able to iterate on it to kind of work towards that production release, but you're always integrating things back into something that works, always trying to keep it working, always sort of trying to have that operational mindset even during development. And once you get to that thing that you're trying to get working, you can sort of spin up parallel work streams from there. You can have people trying to harden the environment, trying to improve the testing capabilities, trying to build out the use case more, trying to do all these different things. And everyone's kind of working together, and you're not building these things in silos, kind of hoping that they fit together later. It's just much more conducive to an agile approach. And then one other point I would say is just that depending on where you're at, investing in new tools to sort of increase your maturity. There's so many capabilities that you get for free from some of the more modern tools that enable this type of data flows and automation and interaction, making decisions to bring things in to help speed up the process of becoming more mature and ultimately getting things into production.
Great. Well, thank you both. This has been a great discussion. We have just about time for a lightning round answer to one more question. It's clear cloud computing is just table stakes. And as we close out, just take a second, each of you, what is going to be modern when we do this again in a few years?
Yeah, Rich, I guess I'll take that first. I'm a big proponent of event-driven enterprise. I think event data and data in motion is really what we're going to see a real explosion within industry of. I think you see it in pockets, a lot of edge companies that aren't mainstream enterprise, but I think you're going to see it as a requirement within the enterprise.
Yeah, I agree with that, Levi, 100%. I also think just in general, there have been lots of new components and types of technology and patterns and stuff. And we're seeing more and more convergence on certain things like Kubernetes, things like open telemetry to have kind of standard ways of monitoring your systems. Just in general, I would say just widespread adoption of cloud native technologies. But I don't necessarily mean in the cloud even. I mean also on-prem, also in edge environments. There's just fundamentally better ways of providing storage, of scaling compute, all that kind of stuff. And really just getting to a point where entire systems and entire solutions can be deployed at the push of a button, automatically tested, automatically executed. We're increasingly moving more in that direction, and I think you're going to continue to see that.
Great. Well, thank you both very much for a lively conversation.